Choosing a camera system is always a tedious task, especially for an independent filmmaker. It is a very tedious task for him to choose a right camera system for him. So here we are talking about our journey through different camera systems from Canon to Sony to Panasonic, how we choose our system and what is the best system that we currently own and what we feel about our previous system. So we are basically comparing our previous Sony system to our new Panasonic system. So this review is completely based on our experience and our style of shooting. It may be applicable for you if you're doing similar kind of videos like what we do. So we are a video production house based in Bangalore. We do a lot of social campaigns, social videos for brands. We do a lot of documentaries and a lot of videos which requires a quick turnaround time. To understand the kind of work that we do, please have a look at our website. The link is given in the description. We have been using Sony mirrorless camera systems since A7S is launched. A7S was a revolutionary camera and it actually changed the industry. So in India, Sony was quite unpopular and most of the industry was using Canon systems in our segment. Canon 5D was popular even with the clients. So everyone was insisting on having a Canon system. But Rahul was somehow sure that Sony is going to be a game changer and A7 is going to be a game-changing camera. So we decided to buy Sony A7S. We bought immediately after it launched in India. Now I think Sony is the industry standard even here for our segment. Most of the people that we see are using Sony cameras and we're very happy with Sony cameras, and there were a lot of reasons that we chose a Sony A7S system. One was the full frame sensor and other was the low light capability, and third was that we could adapt our existing Canon and Nikon lenses to Sony. We don't have to buy a whole lot of new lenses. We had a lot of existing lenses that we could easily adapt. We didn't need autofocus in many cases, so we bought cheap adapters and connected these lenses to Sony. So we had our first Sony camera. This is the very same camera that we bought, the Sony A7S camera. Since then we have been shooting with various Sony cameras, the entire series of Sony A7 lineup, including A7Rs and A7R2s for photography. So we were quite happy with the features that it had. There were a lot of problems that people used to say. Many of them didn't affect us. Basically, like the menu was complicated. It is very hard to move through the menu. As we're using all these cameras on a daily basis, this wasn't a problem because we're almost familiar with the menu and we know how to navigate, even though it is comparatively difficult to go through the entire menu. But we're used to that. So we didn't find that as a major problem. As we are a small team going out and shooting, we wanted to have the flexibility. We didn't want to carry quite a lot of lights for many shoots, which is like documentary shoots where we have to go out quite far and we're not literally able to carry lights. And Sony A7S were able to really get great footages out of very bad scenarios other cameras at that time couldn't do at all. So there are a couple of documentaries that we shot. We were inside a forest and we had very little light, but this camera could really do well in those scenarios. Again, there are a lot of benefits comes with the full frame sensor, shallow depth of field, very cinematic footage and S-Log. So at that time there was no log profile that is available in other cameras at this price point. So S-Log is a game changer again in this particular segment of the industry. We were initially experimenting a lot with S-Log, but we couldn't use quite a lot of S-Log because again our run and gun shooting style, we wanted something that is not intensive in terms of post. There's a lot of work in post if you have to get a good output out from S-Log. So we didn't really shoot a lot with S-Log, but that is a feature we really wanted to have. As there is a lot of positives about these Sony cameras, there have been a lot of negatives also. One of the major problems with these Sony cameras were that it had very small batteries. Now recently with A7R3 and A9, the batteries have been improved, but the cameras what we had very small batteries and we had to carry 10-20 batteries to run through a full day of shoot. So that was a pain. We had a lot of other alternatives, connecting a power bank or having a direct power supply. All of them were really not easy to use. And many of the smaller Sony cameras like the A6300, it is bulked up by a big lens, but this camera is quite small. This A6300 produces a very sharp video, but it overheats. Many Sony cameras have a problem of overheating. A7S, we never experienced it, but A7R2 in terms of video, even A6300 has a very serious, all smaller Sony cameras have a very serious overheating issues. it turns off in between interviews. Especially in our weather condition, in India's weather condition, it is very difficult to do a full day shoot with A6300. And one of the other key issues that we faced was the S-Log was really good and was able to almost get 14 stops of dynamic range in paper. But to shoot an S-Log in an exterior, you need a lot of NDs. In A7S, the base ISO for S-Log was 3200. Later it came down in A7S to 1600, I guess. And then in A6300, it is 800. But it is still to shoot in an exterior condition, you need a lot of NDs. And many times it's a pain to have NDs for different lenses. It softens your images, and it is difficult to focus with an ND. So there are a lot of practical difficulties with shooting with S-Log, and many times as earlier mentioned, many times we didn't shoot on S-Log. We mostly shot with picture profile 5. That is where we mostly relied. It is not completely saturated and contrasty. It is a mid ground for us. Most of the times we used to shoot on PP5 rather than shooting on a PP7 or PP9, where we had a lot of practical issues on shooting. Again, exposing for S-Log is also an issue, and there is a green tint that is there with, I think most of the Sony cameras has a slight issue with the green tint. So that is all that also accentuates while shooting in S-Log. Slow motion, that is also something most Sony cameras lacks in comparing to our current system like GH5 or GH5S, where Sony could shoot up to 120 FPS in some cameras. Like the A6300 could shoot 120 FPS in Full HD, but it's not that great in comparison to many other cameras. Especially the current GH5S shoots up to 180 FPS beautifully, very sharp footages. Most of the cases, the Sony higher frame rate footages were not usable. It was soft, it was blotchy, so it was not that great. In perfect conditions it shoots well, but most of the cases the footages were soft and many times not that pleasing to use in our films. The other features that it lacked was 4K 60 FPS. There was no 10-bit 422. It's the old cameras shot everything on 8-bit. In comparison, GH5S or any GH5 cameras had higher bitrate that could shoot up to 400 Mbps. This couldn't do that. This was also a reason that we decided to look for other camera systems that could do slightly better. Another key reason is Sony was innovating so well at the time that we got the Sony camera. Every camera had quite a lot of new features. But after A7S II, that is released in 2015, now I'm talking on 2019, there was no A7S III, or there was no new camera which was completely focusing on video. There were cameras which focused on hybrid shooting, there were cameras which was focused on photography, but there was no camera that was like A7S or like A7S II which was solely focused on video. There was no such camera. Normally every camera manufacturer releases the next version of that camera in 18 months. As this was a big success, I don't know why Sony decided to hold on to A7S II for this long, and there were a lot of rumors on Sony rumor sites that these features are going to come, these features are coming. We're really waiting for this camera for quite a long. Rahul would, every time when I suggest a camera, Rahul would say that okay, there is A7S III coming, we'll wait for that, then we would decide what to buy. Up to now it never happened, so that was also really disappointing for us. Now let's talk about our current camera system, that is GH5S. Now we own a couple of GH5Ss and we are really happy with GH5Ss. In fact, we hated micro four third systems. We felt that the small sensor size is a serious hurdle, where dynamic range would be comparatively low and very poor low light performance. So a lot of reasons that we felt that micro four systems won't be right for us. And obviously the lenses, it requires a completely new set of lenses, and the focal lengths were also an issue because it had 2x crop. APS-C was difficult, so considering micro four third is even more difficult. But GH5S has changed a lot of those things to us. So in fact, we went to buy a different system from Panasonic. That was an EVA1. We wanted to actually upgrade our system and we wanted to buy EVA1. Accidentally, we happened to see GH5S. I don't know, somehow we bought that camera. So the pleasant surprise with GH5S was its low light capabilities. It performed exceptionally well for a micro four third sensor. It actually works at par with our Sony A7S II cameras, and we really like the footage that comes out. I think that is a major reason that we decided to move to this system, is that the footages that come straight out of the camera is really good. I'm not talking about a log profile, I'm talking about the Cine D profile of GH5S. The colors are really good, the dynamic range is really good, and we really find it easy to work with. Easy to work with in the sense is not in terms of the computing intensity, it is in terms of color grading and workflow, where we had to do very little post-production on these footages. And many of our projects are, as we mentioned before, we shoot on PP5 in Sony, and we do minor color grading, that's contrast adjustment, some saturation, and minor looks, not a very detailed color grading. So with GH5S, we have to do even less, because straight out of the camera, the footages looks really beautiful. This was a pleasant surprise for us to see the footages from GH5S. We started slowly introducing into our projects, and when I'm comparing with Sony footages, I felt more live in the GH5S footages straight out of the camera. I'm able to match both Sony's and GH5S footages in color grading, and they look great after color grading. It is very hard to identify them after a good color grading. But straight out of the camera, I felt GH5S had a punch, had a better color and better dynamic range. This is specifically our experience or our circumstances that we faced on our recent shoots. We didn't consider GH5 or GH4 because of the earlier reasons that I told, that it is a micro four thirds sensor, it may not have the dynamic range I wanted, it may not have the low light capabilities I wanted, but GH5S had all of them. Once GH5 was launched, we wanted to check it out, but we never did, thinking of these issues. When we got GH5S, many of those misconceptions what we had was completely removed from us, and we now use this on a daily basis, and we are very happy. And I'll just state a couple of features that we really like. One is the 60p 4K 60p. We really enjoy shooting handheld, and 4K 60p enabled us to get quite a lot of good handheld footages, and we mostly now shoot all the handheld shots in 4K 60p, and that's really good. And slow motion capabilities, we're able to do a lot of slow motion, far better than the Sony slow motion. We are able to do up to 180 without a crop and up to 240 with a crop. 240 footages are comparatively softer, but up to 180 the footages are really good and usable. And other thing was like variety of formats that you could shoot up to 400 Mbps in 10-bit 422 internally. As mentioned before, this could be great for if I'm doing a green screen or something, an intensive project where I have a lot of detail in the screen. 4K 422 10-bit internal is not available in most of the cameras in this price range. Not even a notch above, it is very hard to find a camera something like this. It cannot be considered as a photographic camera because it has only 10 megapixel. So because it's a 10 megapixel camera, the pixel sizes are comparatively bigger and it can gather more light. So, and it's a full pixel readout. So we are able to directly use those pixels because it's exactly a DCI 4K. The resolution that comes out of the camera is a DCI 4K. So it's a full pixel readout without downsizing or without binning. You're getting a full sensor readout when you're shooting a DCI 4K. That is also another advantage of this camera. And this camera has a lot of features like a full HDMI port, slow motion till 240 FPS, and without crop till 180 FPS, vectorscope, histogram, a lot of features that help you to monitor your exposure, monitor sound, a lot of small features which makes this camera one of the best that you could get in this price range. And another thing that I want to point out is, as the sensor size is small and this is almost like a global shutter. There is no rolling shutter in this camera, or very negligible rolling shutter until unless you put a tele lens. There is literally no rolling shutter that you could observe in this camera. For us, all that matters is how it performs in the field, and we really like the overall feel of the camera. The body is really solid, built well, and I think the weather sealing, we haven't put into very tough conditions, but over the internet what I could read is the weather sealing is much better than the Sony cameras we had. We had issues in terms of weather sealing with the Sony cameras. This looks and holds as a very strong built camera, and we feel that this weather sealing is also comparatively better. Minor things, this camera does not have an in-body stabilization. There is no IBIS. Many of the Panasonic Lumix lenses have optical image stabilization. That's not a major problem as we mostly use with gimbals, but in GH5 it has, and most of our Sony cameras had an in-body image stabilization, and which was really good. And I feel GH5 also has a very good in-body image stabilization, but this camera lacks that. But it's not a deal breaker, but there is something like that. And the colors, I just wanted to give you a cautionary statement that the colors of GH5s and GH5 are not the same. The dynamic range is also not the same. This has a completely new sensor. If you're specific to video, this is the best camera to go for. If you wanted to be a hybrid shooter where you wanted to have some images, GH5 can be a choice. We have not personally tested GH5, we have only used GH5s. So this has been our experience with these two camera systems. We've kind of been happy with both the systems, but now we feel GH5 is a little more to offer than the Sony systems. And Sony systems were not at all a substandard product for us. We still use it for all the photography. The Sony A7R2 and R3 are exceptionally good photography tools, and we still use them. And for video, we feel GH5s has an edge on Sony cameras. Thank you for watching. We'll see you on the future videos.